A Hat in Time by Gears for Breakfast is a 3D open world-ish platformer where you, as Hat Girl, travel different worlds to collect a bunch of shiny things. We'll be looking at the first level, Mafia Town Act 1, which is where you start the game right after the opening cutscene. Each level is split into a few acts, but for most of the game, all of the acts in one world take place on the same open world level with different spawning points and small changes, but the collectibles can be collected in any act. Hat Girl, as the name would imply, wears a hat. In fact, she wears many hats. Each hat has a different ability, and for the first level you can unlock up to the first 3. The basic Kid's Hat, which you start with, just shows the player where their objective is. The Sprint Hat ability lets you sprint and changes the double jump to a single longer jump. The Brewing Hat lets you create potions that blow up these conspicuously glowing boxes. Shiny things to pick up include pawns, yarn, and most importantly, timepieces. Timepieces are the main collectible of each level, and collecting them progresses the game forward as Hat Girl refuels her ship to return home. Yarn has different types, and you need at least one of a given hat's yarn type to craft it, and once you finish crafting a hat, you'll get generic +1 yarn. This unlock requirement means that some collectibles in most levels are inaccessible on a first run, and the player can return after they've unlocked new hats, similar to a Metroidvania. Lastly, pawns give you currency, and heart pawns restore health. Some of these collectibles, namely yarn, and similar collectibles called relics and rift tokens, have these giant rainbowy glowing aura so they can be seen from afar. This aura can also be seen slightly through walls and around corners. There are too many collectibles on this map, so this video will just be focusing on a few main things, plus the main level path. The vaults, a few teaching moments, collectibles that lead into other collectibles, and a few small sequence breaks, plus some other miscellaneous things that I enjoy. I'm playing with keyboard and mouse, so the camera is controlled by my cursor. For metrics, I decided to use Hat Girl's bedroom since you start here and it's a decently rectangular contained space. Some of my footage comes from another save file, so you might see some changes in the hat she's wearing or see something extra in the room. Don't worry about it. The room is a bit too long to measure easily, but I noticed that Hat Girl is approximately the size of one of these larger pink pillows. We'll be measuring everything in Hat Girls or HGs. From the diving board, I was then able to get a shot of the room that would let me calculate its length in HGs, which I got to be around 14.5. This carpet design in the middle is about 4.5 HGs across. Unfortunately, this room was a bit too short for me to easily do some jumps, so I ended up going diagonally for a few of them, which meant that I also had to calculate the size of this other wall, which I did using this wood pattern that is approximately the height of 1 HG, and did some Pythagorean theorem stuff when necessary. Don't let them tell you that math class isn't important. Okay, now for all the metrics. These numbers are approximate because I am bad at video games. It takes about 3.5 seconds to run across this room, giving Hat Girl a default speed of about 4.14 HGs per second. With the Sprint Hat, it takes 2 seconds, so 7.25 HGs per second. One jump is about 4 HGs, a jump plus dive is about 7 HGs, a double jump is about 8 HGs, a sprint jump is also about 8 HGs but with less control, and a double jump plus dive is about 13 HGs, not including sliding. Vertically, Hat Girl's bed is the perfect height to measure this, and we can see her single jump is about 1 HG tall, a double jump is about 2 HGs tall, and a double jump plus mantle gets her to the top of the bed about 3 HGs tall. Jumping off from the bed gets you about 5 HGs of distance, a double jump about 8 HGs, and a dive without a jump about 7 HGs. Hat Girl can also run up walls, and she'll stay on a wall for about half a second before starting to slide down. You also have a crawl, but it's not relevant or fast enough to measure the speed for. Here is a top-down map of Mafia Town, which I got from the A Hat in Time wiki. The map is a happy little island town built on a giant geyser run by the Mafia. It's a very open map due to the lack of walls and few enclosed spaces. This top-down map on its own isn't 100% useful since this level is super vertical, and there are some overhangs that occlude other areas, but here are some annotated maps to help you get an idea. This is a rough elevation map split into 5 tiers, with green as the lowest ground and red as the highest ground. As you can see, the taller stuff is mostly clustered around the center of the map, except for all of these hot air balloons floating around, giving a sense of openness around most of the level and grandeur close to the center. Above the island is actually a restaurant being supported by the central geyser. It's in a later act. These are the 4 main, almost quadrants/zones created by the 4 streams of water coming from the center. I don't think they have official names, so I've titled them the beach, market, port, and construction site. Even though the central geyser helps orient the player slightly, it looks kind of the same from all angles, so each of these areas has a few different landmarks, which I've also labeled. There's generally one recognizable landmark in the low elevation area and one in the high elevation area. There were three quote-unquote fast travel points on the island, which are these three cannons that literally shoot you through the center of the island to the other side. They're only situationally useful, but they're there. Here in purple is the primary path through the level if you don't go off and explore the rest of the island, which I'll call the main story. This orange part is just noting that this platform moves. I'll go into it in more detail later, but you can see the start and end points, and you almost go in a full circle. You could just go left from the spawn point. There's an achievement for it. But it doesn't feel too much like a circle when you play the level, since all of the paths are curved, the geyser and tall buildings are always blocking your view, and there's some variation in elevation. There are 3 vaults in this level. Again, I'll explain it in more detail later, but each vault, marked with an X, requires you to pick up all of the coupons of its color to open it. The red vault and blue vault both need 3, and the green vault needs 6. Lastly, here's all of the main collectibles in this level, including yarn, relics, rift tokens, and chests. The ones that have rainbow auras are in pink, and chests which don't glow are in red. I've also marked the shopkeeper, aka badge seller's 2 locations. You can't collect them, I just put them on this map. The section of the map we're at will be in the corner throughout the other clips. I'll now go over the main story of the level. There will be some text in the bottom of the screen describing the affective state at the moment of gameplay on screen. The map begins with Hat Girl falling into this starting area, and you watch a Mafia guy get thrown into the wall in front of you. It's a dead end covered by a blue tarp, shrouded in shadow. With nowhere else to go and tantalizing pawns as breadcrumbs up ahead, you walk forward, which triggers this cutscene of Mustache Girl. Mustache Girl acts as a white rabbit and leads the player into this area on the left. However, while walking forward, you can also see the bright red bouncing safe in the background. This combination of color contrast and movement draws attention to the vault, and it's a small amount of foreshadowing as Mustache Girl detours you to the left. The space temporarily compresses from bright and open to dark and mostly enclosed. The Mafia guy tells the player that they can double jump,
Small people can jump double in air.
In case they didn't already know. Mustache Girl demonstrates it later though. When the player comes back out, they're right next to the red vault. Standing in front of the vault shows the player that they need 3 coupons, and 3 glowing red lines point to where the 3 coupons are. The first coupon is also placed almost directly in front of the vault itself, with some pawns to breadcrumb up to it. The other 2 coupons are nearby here and here. While collecting these, the player will probably see this yarn floating up in the sky. The green boxes can't be jumped on yet, which foreshadows a future power-up. But, speaking of foreshadowing, we'll come back to this specific yarn later. Upon returning to the vault, the player can now open it, and it will give players their first yarn, a sprint yarn. Since this only needs 2 yarn, they're halfway to the first hat unlock. Continuing forwards, we can see this bridge we have to cross. This curved road and the buildings on the left block our view of what's on the other side. As we cross this bridge, we can see a lot happening. First, the bridge functions as a pinch point and transition, expanding from the narrow alleyway we started in to a more open construction site. Most obviously, there is a big guy walking on a big meat, rolling up and down the road. He will seemingly damage the player if they get rolled over. Because of this pinch point, the camera is most likely to be in this kind of a position, which puts the bright red badge seller in the background along the third's rule lines. Lastly, there's a bit of foreshadowing with this blue platform on the right, which has a snowflake on it and requires the ice hat. Following Mustache Girl, she leads the player through more breadcrumbs and also demonstrates this jump across a road. Mustache Girl has the same moveset as Hat Girl, so the player can learn through imitation that they can jump and dash to clear this gap, but they don't have to and can use a double jump instead too. From here, the player can also detour up here to get to the badge seller. The badge seller sells additional passive abilities that Hat Girl can equip independently of her hat, and these badges require the green pawns the player has been collecting. You could also get here from following this path of breadcrumbs on the pipe from the left. Going back to following Mustache Girl, this white rabbit pattern of her demonstrating a jump plus dash repeats itself, and catching up to Mustache Girl at this point triggers a cutscene. In this somewhat long dialogue that follows, Mustache Girl tells Hat Girl to go up to the bell tower where she is. The camera then rotates to show the player a button. Stepping on the button causes the crane to move this platform, allowing the player to reach the window of the bell tower. A bouncing red arrow also blatantly guides the player to where they need to jump from in order to reach this platform. As you jump out of the window, the placement of these pawns means you're likely to land on this string of flags, which teaches the player that they can walk and jump on them. Catching up with Mustache Girl, the player can see this piece of scaffolding that has some yarn hidden in it. You can see the rainbow aura from between the boards. This crack draws attention to the wall, and the tree has a breadcrumb on it that shows the player where to jump to get to the yarn. As the second yarn, the player will now be able to craft the sprint hat even if they haven't explored to get other yarn. Again, more breadcrumbs and the white rabbit of Mustache Girl lead the player down a narrow alleyway. Mustache Girl tells Hat Girl that the timepiece is just ahead, foreshadowing the near end of the level. She also tells the player to avoid the other Mafia. In her final demonstration, Mustache Girl shows off a double jump and then dash to get past this broken bridge. If you fail the jump instead, like this, you land safely on this short ledge and even get a few extra heart pawns. Finally, walking up to the Mafia member with the timepiece shows this cutscene, which finally gives Hat Girl her weapon, the umbrella. After the cutscene, this Mafia guy becomes a combat tutorial as he doesn't fight back and just runs away from the player. Upon defeating the Mafia member, the timepiece drops on the floor and the player can pick it up to end the level.
Thank you.
The Red Vault was covered in the main story section since it's easily accessible in the main path of this act. I'll go over the other two vaults, which might be easier to access from future act spawn points, but are still available now. The Blue Vault is behind the timepiece of this level, so to avoid accidentally ending the level, it's easier to come at it from the other direction. Its 3 coupons are here, here, and here. If the player hasn't already learned to walk on these flag strings, this coupon forces the player to learn that. I also like where this first coupon is, for a reason that I'll explain later as well. The Green Vault is next to this fast travel cannon, hiding underneath the market. This one requires 6 coupons, which are laid out around the rocks here, 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 and here, and there's 1 coupon inside a tunnel in the market here. But my favorite part around this area is right here. This broken staircase is glowing rainbow, and obviously has a big collectible inside, but it's not clear how to get to it. The only thing around is this cluster of pawns. Picking this up starts a timed challenge to collect all of these pawns that it spawned, but the challenge is very simple. Finishing the challenge causes the staircase to rise and the collectible is now accessible. There are 2 things that I really like about this section. First, the pawn challenge ends here, inside the lower level of the market, facing this Mafia member at the stall. The player will likely want to go forward to talk to the Mafia member, which will bring them closer to the coupon in the tunnel if they haven't gotten it. If they go talk to the next Mafia guy, the coupon is visible on screen. Second, after you finish building these stairs, which are a pretty logical place to go after finishing the Green Vault, where do the stairs lead up to? The Blue Vault. Plus, if you turn around, you can see from the top of the stairs that there are big signs telling you not to go down, which means that if you approach this from the Blue Vault, you'd get a feeling there was something down there, though maybe you can't see what. Like mentioned previously, I'll go over a few specific collectibles that I think each demonstrate something interesting. This first one is not technically a collectible, but I put them on the collectible map, so I'm counting it. It's the badge seller's second location. When coming up to the end of the level, you can't actually see them, they're out of frame. However, if you turn around slightly, you can see their heads sticking out from above the broken wall, and from this angle you can see both their whole body and a break in the wall you can likely land at. How do you get there? Well, the foreground has these perfectly placed umbrellas and a string of flags, the former helping you onto the latter, and the string allows you to land right in front of the badge seller. Okay, now for things you actually pick up. Behind the Blue Vault, there's this little ramp that leads to a box that can be broken with the brewing hat. It has some very blatant red arrows and a circle telling you to destroy it. After destroying the box, it drops a bunch of pawns. But the box itself was blocking another red arrow on the other wall, which points at this tiny hole in the wall that was also behind the box. If the player remembers they can crawl or slides in with the dash, they can go into this crawl space and pick up a relic. Despite how blatant the guidance is, I like this layering of mechanics in an early level and the distribution of rewards that gives the player a big reward for each step they successfully recall. Next, we have this yarn at the dock, which is an example of foreshadowing something that the player can't get to yet without first finishing another world to unlock a new hat. This Mafia member says in dialogue that he doesn't know how to get in, so the entrance is clearly hidden, and this heart pawn on a pile of barrel guides the players to the top. However, even if the player can find this entrance, they know they can't get in yet because they don't have a hat that can interact with the snowflake platform. When the player comes back with the ice hat, though I had already picked up the yarn inside the save file, the dialogue with the Mafia member changes from inside the enclosed area. There is a unique collectible called the camera badge, which the player can find near this tourist. The tourist says that he would have done a belly dive to get there, which hints to the player that they can reach the other platform using a dive. At the same time, there are snowflake platforms on either side, indicating that this is something the player can reach with a future hat. The player who is skilled enough to get to the camera badge now feels like they've cheated by being good enough to get the jump. The snowflake platforms allow for players who fail the jump to come back to it later and use the ice hat to reach the other platform, allowing them to still receive the reward without needing to perform as skilled of a move. Similarly, I mentioned during the main story section that this set of green boxes can't be jumped on. However, with some skill, you can actually pick up this yarn with some parkour. This is another example of something that a player can get to quote-unquote early with some skill and problem solving, though without the hint from an NPC. On this dock near the market, there are some ponds and breakable barrels at the very end of the pier. On the way there, there's a red chest. If you see the chest on the way to the ponds, like I did here, it's just a slightly long trip. However, if you missed the chest, then after you turn around from getting the ponds to go back to the mainland, you can see the chest right there, mostly along the Thirds Rule lines. I like that these ponds essentially bait the player, as there's nothing else to get from there, to go somewhere to see something from a new perspective. Lastly, the other thing I mentioned I'd get back to, this Blue Vault coupon. While picking up this coupon, you can see in the background a bright spot of sun amidst the shade. The player can faintly see some kind of a fence with an entrance, though because it's an oblique approach, they can't see what would be behind it. A line of enemies also guides the player there, and, after I detour for these pawns, a pawn up on this ledge gives the player a better view of what's behind the fence. A couple more enemies are there as the player turns to see a chest and some pawns behind it. I really like the approach from the Blue Vault coupon to this chest, but even if the player were coming from another angle, you could see here that there is still a contrast of brightness and some nice framing from the fence around the chest to draw attention to it. Here's a section of things I like that couldn't fit into the other sections. I love these breadcrumb pawns set up on top of umbrellas that get the player to jump onto the umbrella only to find out that they're bouncy. The three colors of umbrellas also have 3 different bounce heights. Blue is the lowest, orange is higher, and red is the highest. There's this little path near the red vault that leads you to different parts of the island, but if you then come back around to this ladder here and then over to the left, you can jump down the hole in the tarp that you saw at the very beginning to land in the spawn point for the level. This has no real purpose, but I think it's cute. There is a mechanic where jumping into balloons will give Hatgirl a small vertical boost. The first time the player will likely encounter them is near the rolling meat Mafia guy, though you don't need to walk here for the main story. I like that this red balloon is close enough to the ground that just running through it will teach the player how they work, no jumping necessary. And then if you line up with both balloons, you get sent up to this platform that has a yarn, which was already gone by the time I filmed this. I like the seagulls around the level. Sometimes they just hang around and they're fun to scare off, but other times they work like a breadcrumb, showing the player what platform to jump to, like this one near the yarn on its nest, pretending that I hadn't completely failed this jump. Finally, there's a giant black tent called the Black Market near the docks. There are giant flashing arrows and a flashing sign saying Black Market. This is both hilariously not what a real black market would ever do, but it also feels like a game design red herring, because you would expect some kind of secret in there. There's not. There's literally nothing, because it all got cut in development. That's all for this A Hat in Time level analysis, and thank you so much for watching.